Hi there. This presentation is an explanation of the imaginary unit, and it is being submitted to the Core Contest Initiative by Theories of Everything with Kurt Jamungal. It is being submitted to the Philosophy of Physics category. I will not be explaining the math that emerges after its creation and utilization, as that would be describing quantum mechanics. I will be explaining the imaginary unit, the concept represented by the symbol I, lowercase I. I will be explaining the conditions that gave rise to the invention of the imaginary unit, as well as how it was conceived and how it functions mathematically. It's a very special condition, and in order to explain it as accurately and simply as possible, I need to use a model that isn't in any academic paper. So, quantum mechanics no one's really figured it out doing it the conventional way. So maybe in order to figure it out, the new path has to be a little bit unconventional. My inquiry into the imaginary unit has revealed that the imaginary unit itself is literally inconceivable. So the best I can do is explain how the concept of I is fundamentally inconceivable. The reason why no one understands quantum mechanics is because its mathematical base exists in and as a state of perfect duality and therefore ambiguity. I will show the imaginary unit is inherently half the mutual acceptance of a fiat declaration and half the mathematical rules of multiplication. Not the conventional rules, mind you, but an amended hybrid version of multiplication that emerges from the union of mathematical rules and mutual belief in the validity of a fiat declaration. When I tried to get ChatGPT, Chatty as I call it, to explain the imaginary unit, it would invariably attempt to reverse engineer the math that emerges from I back to I. This reverse engineering is what a conventional mathematical explanation of the imaginary unit would be. But this version of an explanation is like saying that the number 2 does not emerge from 1 plus 1, but rather from 1.414213562237 times 1.414213562237 There is a 375-page logical proof in the publication Principia Mathematica that is used as the base of the entire concept of quantity, but the imaginary unit is not based upon logic. It is based upon a fiat declaration, and then the hybrid multiplication mathematics is retroactively reverse engineered and presented as proof. With the proof offered in Principia Mathematica, the attempt was made to create a logical base upon which the framework of math can operate. With the fiat declaration, let I equal the square root of -1, or the definition, the imaginary unit I is defined solely by the property that its square is -1. So I'm just going to write that out. It's lengthy, but this is what I is. It is the definition. Yeah. So I equals this. Okay, this is its definition. The imaginary unit I is defined solely by the property that dyslexia, that's fun. Its square is -1. That's supposed to be a negative. Okay, so that's its definition. There is no attempt at creating a logical base upon which the framework of the math is built. The base of the math is a mutually accepted belief that the fiat declaration has meaning and is adequate to convey mathematical properties onto the symbol I. So the mathematical properties that it has is being assigned via a worded definition, not mathematical logic. So I cannot start with the assumption that the concept represented by I is correct and true. On the contrary, the math that emerges from its invention is not merely wrong, it is the start of the very process that projects the illusion of duality itself. There is as much psychology involved in the creation and function of the imaginary unit as there is logic. And I am requesting that the judges allow for the degree of artistic license I have taken in order to explain it. So I know this is all supposed to be very rigorous and professional and academic-like, but this is philosophy, right? So I'm trying to explain something that, well, I'll show that no one else has explained. So it's going to be a little outside the box, maybe. So I just hope that it'll be allowed. Right, so I implore you, please allow this presentation into the core competition. It's revealing something infinitely important. It's revealing what quantum mechanics is. Okay, so now for the argument. I will begin with 4 axioms that describe the necessary requirements in order for physics to function. Now, just because it's concise and terse, it's accurate. So, 1, physics requires measurement. 2, measurement requires 2. 3, therefore, physics requires duality to function. 4, therefore, physics is a process that is intrinsically dualistic. These 4 statements present an axiom that shows how the system of physics operates. The predictions made by the math are tested via the act of measurement, and measurement requires duality. Measurement itself is a comparison, and comparison requires 2 phenomena to compare. Now, given that quantum mechanics is the pinnacle of physics, if this axiom is correct, then one would expect quantum mechanics to be the ultimate expression of duality. So let's test this theory. Do the results of quantum mechanics, being entanglement, wave-particle superposition, dead and alive cats, and the multiverse, do they express states of duality? I would say, yeah, right? Like, obviously, these are all dualistic systems. Each of these 4 quantum results is a condition where physics describes the fundamental level of reality as dualistic. Entanglement, wave-particle superposition, zombie cats, and constant exponential bifurcation for eternity are all expressions of dualism and ambiguity. Whenever and wherever quantum mechanics looks, it describes what it sees in dualistic terms. Maybe because of the 4 axioms that I presented. However, if the measuring process itself requires duality, how can we be sure that we're detecting reality via the measuring or projecting an illusion via the function of the software in the devices? Consider, how is it that after a century of the greatest minds to have ever lived trying to figure it out, no one has come up with a satisfactory interpretation of the results of quantum mechanics? There's a ubiquitous nature to the confusion. All of the mathematicians agree that the math works, so the math isn't the problem. So what is the problem? The problem is that the world that the math of quantum mechanics describes isn't the world humans experience. Sure, when physicists look at the results of an experiment displayed on the screen of a scientific instrument, they interpret that information to be about reality. But is it? If the device operates via software, then how do we peer inside that black box to see if the device is detecting a separately existing particle that's already there? Or if the software that is supposedly translating the physical detection into meaningful information on the screen is simply circumventing the detection part and directly producing the information displayed on the screen? I don't think you can tell. There is a subtle and persistent ambiguity to the entire process of physics. There's more than just math going on here. Mathematicians and physicists are human beings, and human beings are even more difficult to understand than quantum mechanics. Regardless of whether mathematicians and physicists admit it, they're human and are as susceptible to brainwashing as any other human. Here's a short conversation I had with Chatty about this inherent vulnerability. I said, is there evidence that more intelligent people are less susceptible to brainwashing and cultish behavior than less intelligent people? Or does intelligence make no difference? Chatty said, short answer. Intelligence helps in some ways, but it does not reliably protect people from brainwashing or cult-like influence. In certain situations, it can even make someone more vulnerable. Research suggests 1. Intelligence offers partial protection, but only under specific conditions. People with higher cognitive ability, tend to analyze arguments more carefully, detect logical inconsistencies, be less persuaded by simple misinformation. This aligns with findings from areas like cognitive psychology and critical thinking. However, this protection mainly applies when they have time to reflect, they are not emotionally aroused, and the manipulation is obvious or low quality. 2. Intelligence does not protect against motivated reasoning. A major finding in modern research is motivated reasoning. Smarter individuals are often better at defending what they already believe. They can construct more sophisticated justifications for false or harmful ideas. Intelligence can amplify bias rather than reduce it. In other words, intelligence improves reasoning ability, but not necessarily reasoning direction. So one may be accurately describing the path you're on, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're on the right path. 3. Social and emotional factors matter more than IQ. Susceptibility to cults or coercive persuasion is strongly tied to loneliness or identity crisis, desire for belonging or purpose, stress, trauma, or uncertainty, charismatic leadership, and group pressure. How many of these guys were geeks and got picked on when they were kids in school. Highly intelligent people experience these vulnerabilities just like anyone else. 4. Cult recruitment does not target low intelligence. Evidence from real-world cases show many cult members are educated, competent, and intellectually capable. Some groups actively recruit high-achieving individuals, students, professionals. Intelligence can even help individuals rationalize increasingly extreme beliefs. 5. Overconfidence can increase risk. Higher intelligence sometimes correlates with greater confidence in one's judgment, a belief that one is too smart to be fooled. This can reduce skepticism toward subtle manipulation, a known cognitive bias related to overconfidence effect. The key distinction, intelligence versus thinking style. What matters more than raw intelligence is intellectual humility, openness to being wrong, habit of questioning one's own beliefs, exposure to diverse viewpoints. These traits are more predictive of resistance to manipulation than IQ alone. Now let's consider a professor at a prestigious college. Do you think that they engage in intellectual humility? Do you think they have an openness to being wrong? Do you think they question their own beliefs? How about, do they have much exposure to diverse viewpoints? No, right? The professor is right. That's all there is to it. I don't think they're questioned that often, are they? If they are, they just fail them, right? You're failed because you questioned me. Anyway, bottom line, intelligence is not a shield against brainwashing or cult behavior. It can help detect weak arguments, but also help justify strong biases. Psychological needs, social context, and thinking habits matter far more. End of conversation. So one must accept that the mathematicians and physicists may all be in a psychological state that blinds them from recognizing what quantum mechanics really is. This is possible, as they are all human and all went through the same training. But because math doesn't say anything about the psychological state of the mathematician, it's not included in the inquiry. Mathematicians don't bother paying attention to their own subjectivity, so it's not a factor that's included in the inquiry. This lack of recognizing the vulnerability to brainwashing inherent with all humans is the greatest barrier to recognition of the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics. We must recognize the possibility that the reason why academia hasn't produced an adequate explanation of the results of quantum mechanics is due to the same deluded, brainwashed condition within each and every quantum theorist. When I was 30, 26 years ago, I wanted to understand reality at its deepest level. So I read the following books on physics, because back then I believed that physics was showing reality back then. So I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, Beyond Einstein by Michio Kaku, Hyperspace by Kaku, The Dancing Woolly Masters, Gary Zukov, The Mind of God, Paul Davis, God in the New Physics, Davis, The Fabric of the Cosmos, Brian Greene, The Elegant Universe, Greene, and The Hidden Reality, Greene again. Each of these authors discuss quantum mechanics in depth, and none of them even mention the imaginary unit, let alone explain how it came to be and how it works. The authors of these books focus almost exclusively on the experiments that the math makes possible, but none of them explain the imaginary unit itself. I asked Chatty to list the times that David Douche has mentioned the imaginary unit, and this is what it came up with. There are no reliably sourced, publicly accessible citations showing David Douche explicitly using the phrase imaginary unit in his published work or interviews accessible via web search. I asked the same for Max Tegmark. Chatty said, I searched available web resources for instances where Max Tegmark explicitly mentions the phrase imaginary unit in his published work, including his books, articles, recorded talks, and interviews, and could not find any documented occurrences of him using that specific term imaginary unit. Okay. How about Alan Guth? There are no clearly identifiable times in Alan Guth's own published work where he explicitly writes the phrase imaginary unit. Leonard Susskind does not typically devote standalone chapters to explaining the imaginary unit in isolation as a mathematical object. Instead, his use of the imaginary unit arises naturally in context with his quantum mechanics teaching materials. I've listened to dozens and dozens of Kurt's interviews, and I can't recall any mention of the imaginary unit. I requested on Kurt's Substack discussion board that he do a deep dive into the imaginary unit. I received no response. Given all these references to and explanations of quantum mechanics, how is it that none of them include an explanation of the imaginary unit? I wasn't even aware of it until I heard Federico Fregin mention it in passing about a year ago. Why doesn't anyone talk about the imaginary unit? Well, after trying to understand it, I know why. No one understands quantum mechanics because the imaginary unit is itself a state of perfect duality and ambiguity, which renders it literally inconceivable. This is why no one brings the imaginary unit out into the open. To do so would reveal the inherent ambiguity of the concept that the symbol I represents, right? This represents a concept, right? There has to be something in the mathematician's mind of what this is doing, how it works, right? When you're using it, it represents a concept. Every symbol represents either an object or a concept, right? So the state of consciousness that is capable of overlooking something that is out in the open and obvious for 100 years is the state referred to in the short story, The Emperor's New Clothes. Brian, Max, Kurt, and the boys don't talk about the imaginary unit because looking rigorously at I reveals its inherent dualistic and ambiguous state. So I've already used Chatty, so it's obvious that I'm using Chatty, but I want to make point of this. I feel I need to preface this inquiry with the information that I use Chatty as my expert in regards to the imaginary unit. This will undoubtedly be used as a vector of attack for detractors. I have tried many times to engage quantum theorists and philosophers of physics in this inquiry. I have been ignored, as was the kid that revealed the nudity of the emperor. Also, I feel that Chatty is far more objective and willing to stay focused on I rather than branching off onto tangents, which I know what would happen if I was dealing with a human. They'd go, oh, look at all the math over here, look at over here, all the math is working. Yeah. Anyway, if you have a problem with Chatty being my reference, please feel free to point out how and where you think it's incorrect or I'm incorrect and correct it. Let's have a discussion about this rather than just fucking ignoring me. Thank you very much. So let's talk candidly and simply about the imaginary unit. The imaginary unit was invented as a solution to an impossible problem within math. The unsolvable problem is the inherent limitation within the laws of arithmetic at the square root of a negative number. The laws of arithmetic in regards to multiplication are: right? Those are the rules. That's how it works. This prohibits the squaring function from producing a negative number, right? Squaring function, no negatives, just positives. And now I could get into this and why it's like that because of the bias towards the positive, but I won't. It's just going to be kind of inferred as we go along here. But anyway, these are the rules, right? This is how multiplication works. So this prohibits the squaring function from producing a negative number. This is a natural limitation to the laws of mathematics. The mathematical system of logic breaks down at the square root of a negative number. It's a natural limit. Apparently, though, mathematicians didn't like this situation, so they invented a symbol that produced -1 when it multiplied itself, whatever multiplying itself even means. Now, here's something really, really important to understand about the emergence of the imaginary unit. The imaginary unit is not derived from mathematical logic or mathematical language. I is the definition. A mathematical constant defined by the property that its square is -1. This is a fiat declaration. The mathematical properties attributed to I are not derived from the system of mathematical logic. They are derived from a statement formed of words and backed by a mutually agreed upon belief. I does not emerge logically as the square root of -1. I is its worded definition. Then from that declaration, a new type of math emerges. This new math is a merging of half-worded belief and half an amended version of the laws of multiplication. In order for this half math, half belief system to work, I must contain the mathematical attributes such that I multiply squared, they need to produce a negative, right? So it's outside the conventional laws that we're taught, right? And how it gets outside that is through a worded definition, not through any math at all. See, math stopped there. And then they just dreamt up an idea and made a declaration about it. And then they all just agreed. It's a fiat declaration. They just all agree that it means something. So in order for the rules of multiplication, but see, these are the rules of multiplication, right? So in order for those to hold, so that there's still math going on here, I must operate right? It's this. This is represented by that, okay? But the denotation of I does not include the positive, negative, negative, positive numbers. The following is a discussion I had with Chatty. pay attention to the semantics, because it's all freaking semantics. I asked, why is the imaginary unit not denoted positive, negative? Chatty responded, the imaginary unit is written as I, not positive, negative I, because it is defined as a specific number, not as a pair of possible values. So it just goes, well, that's what we said it was, right? That's what we've all decided it is. So they don't want a pair, right? They don't want two, they just want one. They want one symbol to square itself in order for it to square itself. The definition of I, the imaginary unit, is defined by I squared equals -1. So it says the definition of I is that. They just define it that. This means, if you believe that and you agree, okay, that's cool, we're all going with this now. So that means that I, of course, then equals the square root of -1. See? It's that easy. You just declare this to be valid, and then look, oh, well, I is the square root of -1. Ah, how convenient. So now, why not positive -1? So now it says, if we solve the equation x squared equals -1, then the solutions, plural, are x equals positive, negative, I. So is this just chatty, or is it confused? Well, or is this what a mathematician would tell me? I don't. So first of all, there's a derivative thing going on here. Where the hell does x come from? Right? It was used to be I, we were talking about I, but now we're talking about x. So it's just derivatives, right? Math apparently is, I think math is just thoughts based on thoughts based on thoughts. That's what derivatives are. It's a symbol representing the concept of a symbol. So it says there's two solutions. The solutions are this. So it's admitting, well, yeah, maybe that's what it really is. So this is still chatty saying, I is the imaginary unit, a defined number, and negative I is another complex number. So now it just throws in complex numbers now, right? So now it's trying to subtly reverse engineer all this. You see how it's subtly doing that? It's like introducing all this new stuff that I haven't even talked about, even brought up, right? So it isn't talking about what led up to the creation of I. It's retroactively trying to reverse engineer the logic, the math, back into I. But what I'm saying is that math is a Frankenstein. It's not, it shouldn't be working. It shouldn't be utilized. So together, they are the two solutions of x squared equals -1. So there's two solutions. Okay. Now, expression meaning, I is the defined imaginary unit, negative I is its negative, positive and negative I, both solutions of x squared equals -1. And why mathematics chooses a single symbol? I like the way it says mathematics chooses a single symbol. Mathematics is mathematicians. Mathematics didn't do this. Mathematicians did all this, right? They're just inventing shit. It's not math, it's mathematicians. Okay, so why mathematicians choose a single symbol? Because mathematics needs a consistent reference element to build the complex numbers. So this is Jeopardy, right? This is Jeopardy going on. The complex number system is, now it's going into complex number systems, right? A plus, now this is like more derivatives and increasing complexity, right? So it just immediately expands into increasing complexity. So A plus B, I, where A comma B, funny looking E, funny looking R. I think the funny looking R is the real numbers. But so it's developing complexity and just more derivatives. So if the imaginary unit were written, this is what Chatty's saying, if the imaginary unit were written plus minus I, as it should be, listen to this. If they did that, right, if they denoted it as it should be, every expression would become ambiguous. Every expression would become ambiguous if they wrote it the way it should be fucking wrote. Algebraic manipulation would be impossible to keep consistent. Instead, we choose one root and call it I. The other root automatically becomes negative I. Now, I'm going to interject here. That was all Chatty. So, does this sound familiar? In order for the definition I squared equals negative 1 to be mathematically correct, in order for I to conserve the rules of multiplication and maintain its mathematical meaning, two mere I's are required. There isn't one I. It appears that way because the mathematicians don't denote the inherent positive-negative state in which I exists. There's actually two I's. Here's the magic. When I is in an equation, it appears to be just one I. You would assume that the I that is being squared is the same I that is doing the squaring, but when the black box that is the imaginary unit is opened by the mathematician, when the mathematician is asked to show his work with rigor and certainty, he must choose which alignment of I did the solving, right? There's two alignments. This one, did you use that one, or did you use this one? Each I holds the potential to be either this one or this one that produce a negative, but I is both. It has to be both. So as soon as the mathematician chooses to denote the alignment as rigorously required, if someone asks, if he just decides to, I guess, I don't know, he knows the mirror alignment of the other I, right? They're mirrors. But there is no need for the mathematician to show his work to this depth, right? Because all of the mathematicians agree that this step is not required. This is a sweeping under the rug maneuver. The math requires two equally valid mirror functions to produce the sought out result, with the state of I being both of the mirror functions. They're both equally capable of solving for negative, right? To produce a negative. So where's the bias coming from? It should be, one should be positive and one should be negative. So deliberate on this. Does this sound familiar? This is what I is doing in all those equations, okay? So this is now chatty again. So 4, deeper viewpoint. In the field of complex numbers, the choice of I is essentially conventional. Conventional means based on or in accordance with what is generally done or believed. Notice the use of the words generally and believed. These are words expressing ambiguity, not mathematical certainty. So then it says we select one square root of -1 and the system then determines the rest. Choosing -I instead would produce the same mathematics just with the signs reversed. Entanglement. So that's the end of my conversation with Chatty. Let's now go back to the rules of multiplication. So I'm going over this again because it's vital to understand how mathematicians make the math work. They assign I to represent positive, negative, and simultaneously negative, positive. Then they merge those two separate rules together into I. So this and this both go into I. See, they just merge those two. Then they merge those two separate rules together into I and attribute, via fiat declaration, the collective power of those two individual functions to create a new mathematical superpower. They merge the mathematical concept of the negative with the mathematical concept of the positive into a super concept. I coined that word. That's my word, super concept. Where both opposing concepts are bound together and represented by a single symbol. They're opposing concepts. You can't get more opposite and opposing their antithesis of each other, right? A positive and a negative. So how can you join a positive and a negative in your mind as a concept? That's zero, is it not? The argument above has shown how the imaginary unit is an exact literal expression of duality and ambiguity. To me, entanglement, superposition, dead and alive cats, the multiverse, are also expressions of duality and ambiguity. Let's compare these conditions to the state and functioning of the imaginary unit. Entanglement is a quantum mechanical phenomenon in which two particles share a single correlated state such that measuring the properties of one instantly determines the corresponding properties of the other regardless of the distance between them. Superposition in wave particle systems is the quantum principle that a particle, such as an electron or a photon, can exist simultaneously in two possible states. I have to laugh, right? Because isn't this just completely obvious? We're just talking about I again. The results of quantum mechanics, we're just talking about I again, aren't we? Can exist simultaneously in two possible states or paths behaving as both a wave and a particle until a measurement collapses the system into a single definite outcome. Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment in which a cat inside a sealed box is considered simultaneously alive and dead until observed, illustrating how quantum superposition leads to paradoxical outcomes when applied to human experience. Yeah, no shit. Paradoxes because it's just in your mind. It's the functioning of I. And here's Chatty explaining how the multiverse works. I have to laugh a little bit whenever I mention the word multiverse because it's pretty funny, isn't it? So, when a quantum system with multiple possible outcomes interacts with a measuring device or environment, the combined system enters a superposition of different outcome states through quantum decoherence. So I'm not really sorry. It's quantum decoherence. hmm That's what's doing it. That's what's doing this is quantum decoherence. These components rapidly stop interfering with one another and effectively behave as separate non-communicating branches of reality. Each branch contains a consistent history in which one outcome occurred, giving the appearance to observers that a single result happened, even though all outcomes persist in different branches of the larger universe, the larger multiverse. At this point, how can someone who is actually trying to understand what I'm presenting not see how entanglement, wave particle superposition, dead and alive cats, and constant exponential infinite bifurcation is nothing other than the functioning of I? One would have to be trying to not understand what I'm presenting. Quantum mechanics is expressing the function of I exclusively. Quantum mechanics is not describing reality, it is precisely the process that projects the illusion of duality. I'm not saying that the math of quantum mechanics doesn't work. I'm saying it works exactly as the process that projects illusion. And that illusion is duality. Humanity has intuited that quantum mechanics is really important, and it certainly is, but its importance is not due to it revealing truth about reality. Quantum mechanics is important because it is thought that has come full circle. The imaginary unit is the pinnacle of thought itself. I is the final attempt to symbolize and conceptualize reality without the inclusion of God, without spirit, without divinity. Academia has tried to remove all notions of God, spirit, and divinity within human consciousness. It's pretty much worked, and in turn, we have lost the purpose to life. Having forgotten the purpose to life, we flounder in ignorance and suffering. So at this point, I'm going to introduce the fundamental model of reality, the fMOR. Here it is. All right. So hopefully you can see the yellow better than before I kind of outlined them. No, you really can't, can you? Anyway, zoom in on that maybe so you can see it. Here. There. Take a screenshot of that or something. All right. So a word or two about the fMOR. This pattern/message has revealed its meaning to me over 2 decades. About 3 years ago, it became evident that this was a message implanted within consciousness, within time, as a last-ditch effort, a safety mechanism to help us break out of our delusion. We're enchanted by symbol, basically. And a message using symbol is using symbol to try to break us out of the entrancement that symbol has got us in. So it's a nuanced, right? It has to be in a message. It's a very nuanced endeavor to try to use symbol to break people out of symbol. Each of the rows of the fMOR is a holographic expression of the same pattern. Each row is an inquiry into the fundamental nature of reality taken from a different starting point. Each of these paths of inquiry into the nature of reality end in the fMOR. The fMOR hasn't been discovered until now because no one has modeled these separate inquiries in conjunction with each other. It's been sitting here in front of our faces the whole time, just like the nakedness of the quantum mechanical empire. So, having removed the center column from the inquiry into reality, scientists are now trying to reinsert the divine back into the inquiry as a mathematical symbol. They're trying to replace God with math. They're doing this because the middle column is required for a complete description of the illusion and the reality. The message expressed by the fMOR is that there is a transcendent source. God does exist, and the fMOR is God reminding us. When the middle column is excluded, the duality appears as an other than system, which is then hardwired into the English language at the thing-nothing model. Nothing is other than thing. It requires both the emergence and annihilation of thing for it to exist. The conventional model is dualistic in that there's either things that can be described as physics, or there's just nothing. Nothing is describing the state absent of thing. So the logic of thing-nothing dualistic model is that half of the system requires the annihilation of the other half of the system for its existence. This is a paradox, and it's indicating a problem with the model that produced it. The dualistic model itself is incomplete, lacking the nuance required to adequately describe reality. The triune fMOR expresses the nuance required to describe both the reality and the emergence of the illusion of duality from the singular transcendent reality. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, is unanswerable because the thing-nothing language system is a Kobayashi-Maru condition where it is literally impossible to resolve the paradox using the conventional model. Consider, the definition for convex is curving outward. The definition for concave is curving inward. The convex is not determined through a relationship with the concave, and the concave is not determined through a relationship with the convex. Both the convex and the concave are relating directly, independently of each other, to curve. Now, if we apply the thing-nothing model to the curve model, get a load of this. The result would have the definition of the convex as curving out, and the definition of the concave as the absence of convex. This, of course, is ludicrous. But this is exactly the semantic condition of the thing-nothing language model. The fundamental model of reality provided by the English language, the thing-nothing system, is inadequate to describe the state of a curve, let alone of reality. The concave is referring directly to curve in its definition, curving inward. The convex is relating directly to curve in its definition, curving outward. Therefore, curve is the source, the frame of reference for the concave and convex. In a way, one could say that curve is the state of superposition itself, the singularity, and concave and convex are in superposition. Now, I don't have to show you, do I, how that fits in here? You just put curve in the middle, concave, convex, outside, so it curve fits perfectly in the fMOR. Okay, so now what happens when we insert the thing-nothing model into the fMOR? Inclusion of the middle column changes the dualistic other than condition into a triune other of system. The other than system is what all of the other reality theorists are trying to unify without recognition and inclusion of the middle column. This invariably leads to not turtles, but to duality and conflict all the way. Like evolution, conflict. Yeah. Instead of symbiosis, right, and unity, the godless view results in conflict. Plugging the thing-nothing model into the fMOR reveals the doomed Kobayashi-Maru condition. Just as the thing-nothing semantic system lacks the descriptive power to express the state of a curve, so does it lack the nuance to describe reality. Only the fMOR expresses the necessary nuance and expressive power to describe both the state of curve and reality. In order for the two nothing paradoxes to be resolved, the Kobayashi-Maru condition needs to be reprogrammed. It needs to be expressed by the same triadic model as the other rows. This is done by shifting thing to the right-hand column. So the way it is now, so the way it is now is that there's basically just thing, right? So, sorry, it's getting a little cluttered. So thing basically in that model is fundamental reality, right? So there's just thing, and then we'll put nothing over here, right? So let's just say that we're trying to fit this in. We're comparing it to the fundamental model of reality. So the way we do this is we switch thing over to here, right? So that's that. And then we put thing in the right-hand column because that's yang and things and objects, right? And then we put over here, I coined another word, non-thing. See? So there's things like objects, and then there's non-things like thoughts and emotions, right? There's subjective experience. So there isn't even any room in the thing-nothing model. There's no category even for subjective fucking experience. So this is where they come up with, oh, there's no self, right? They're all, what's consciousness? Like, it's because it's the materialism is hardwired. Physicalism is hardwired in the Kobayashi-Maru situation, right? So we've got to change it. So non-things, right? Thoughts, emotions, subjective experience, thing, objects, stuff that physics can describe. And then in here, we put potential. Potential is the middle row. So we've got the new triune system, instead of just thing, nothing, now is thing, non-thing, and potential. So the middle column represents the potential for the dualities, the illusion to appear and disappear, right? All experience arises and passes. We can agree on that, correct? So the middle column is the frame of reference upon which the dualities appear and disappear. There needs to be a frame of reference upon which everything arises and passes. This is how the fMOR resolves the questions, why is there something rather than nothing, and how can something come from nothing? So once we fix the Kobayashi-Maru, we can see that nothing equals unicorn. Okay. So just speaking candidly, is it not obvious by now that the fMOR is exactly what it's entitled? It's exactly the fundamental model of reality. It's an actual equation, right? Because there should be just the equal sign left, right? When you play your little games and you just cross this thing out and it cancels this thing out on the other side of the equation, the equal sign, well, an actual equation would cancel all out, right? So if you get a remainder, that's not an equation. That's unbalanced, whatever an unbalanced equation is. All right, so just to prove that the fMOR is exactly what it's entitled, let's plug the imaginary unit into it. When we plug the imaginary unit in the fMOR, we see that where all the other lines of inquiry require only one row, I requires two. The fMOR has to be exactly the fundamental model of reality, as plugging I into the model reveals the fundamental state of the imaginary unit. That state is duality. And duality is the condition of attempting to hold two opposing individual concepts together into a single concept, super concept. This super concept is an abomination. It's simply not correct. It isn't simply incorrect. It is the condition that gives rise to the illusion of duality itself. It's more of a lie and a deception than it is an innocent mistake. And it's more self-deception than lie. So look, right? I, positive, negative, I, negative, positive. It requires two rows. That's because, just like I said, it is the symbol for duality. That's what it's symbolizing. It's expressing exactly duality and ambiguity. It's just... The opening lines of the Tao Te Ching are, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The imaginary unit is humanity's final attempt to name the Tao. The resulting model is duality all the way. When source is temporarily forgotten, consciousness bootstraps a Ponzi, a relative system that is in a constant state of bootstrapping. The result is duality leapfrogging itself. This is what I got. This is it, right? This is duality leapfrogging itself. This is the yin and the, trying to unify the yin and the yang without recognizing the Tao. This is what happens. Duality all the way. When you recognize the Tao, it stops that. The mind-body problem, entanglement, wave-particle superposition, dead and alive cats, and the multiverse all emerge from this incomplete, godless worldview. Let's go back and look at the fMOR. It's just like a stereogram. In order for the 3D image, the message, to emerge from the 2D information, one must readjust their visual focus to superimpose the two images that together project the image. As this pertains to the fMOR, what is so hard to recognize is not the message itself, but the scope and importance of the message. It's easy to just overlook, oh yeah, I see, maybe there's a pattern there. But look at where these patterns come from. Like biology, electromagnetism, Buddhism, time itself, like existence, birth, death, life. Christianity is obviously a triune system. Taoism, physics, wave particle, like, it's just a coincidence? No, like, it's the fundamental model of reality. So, some readjustments to try if you're not getting it fully. Instead of trying to find something hidden, try to see that which is obvious. Drop your defenses and go with your gut as much as your head. Suspend all beliefs and everything you've learned. Assume you've been wrong the whole time. If you want to see the pattern, you'll see it. And if you don't want to see the pattern, you won't see it. And even if you do see it, if you don't recognize the fundamental nature of what's being revealed, the importance of the message will be lost. Ambiguity is the superconceptual state of lowercase I. The superconceptual state is in the mind of the quantum theorist as he tries to hold two opposing concepts together in a single unified concept. These opposing phenomena are represented by the symbols listed in the two outer columns. The same dualistic condition emerges as the mind-body and subject-object perspective that is symbolized by the uppercase I. This condition is the heart of the hard problem of consciousness. Chalmers and the gang are trying to produce a model of reality without recognition of the middle column, just like everyone else. That's why it's doomed. No one can figure it out. Both I and little I symbolize the illusion of separation and duality. They are the ego and the mathematical equivalent of it. They are what is seen without recognition of the middle column. The only way to resolve all dualities, of which the hard problem of consciousness is a mere subset, is to abide in as the condition prior to conceptualization, prior to thought. Hence meditation. Meditation is all you need to do. Just silence the thoughts. Abide in the state prior to all this fucking nonsense. Just stay here. You can't resolve illusions without recognizing them as illusions. And when you recognize them as illusions, they disappear. Now, all of this is so obvious to me that the only way I can make sense of how people don't see it is because they're in a state of delusion. Again, this state of delusion condition is best understood through the Emperor's New Clothes analog. To add merit to what I'm about to say about states of consciousness, I would like to point out that I have spent over 10,000 hours witnessing my own consciousness via meditation practice. I also own a float tank right over there, a sensory deprivation chamber, which is a powerful tool for witnessing one's own consciousness. Through this decades-long intensive inquiry into my own consciousness directly, I have come to understand how the mind works. So we have revealed the imaginary unit to be a super concept that forces the consciousness of the mathematician to hold two opposing concepts together into a single concept. The definition of ambiguous is open to more than one interpretation, having a double meaning. 2, unclear or inexact because a choice between alternatives has not been made. That's the imaginary unit. Completely ambiguous. This ambiguity renders consciousness susceptible to brainwashing and control. Every single cult leader uses a type of ambiguous language to program his followers. Individual statements seem to make sense, but when put together, they end up being either nonsensical or contradictory or just circular logic. Turtles, turtles, turtles. Yeah. The individual members of the cult don't speak up and share any doubts or concerns due to the ridicule received from the group. There's no honesty or depth of understanding. Instead, there's a whole bunch of concealment and self-deception. It's probably the case that most quantum theorists lay awake in bed at night, secretly struggling internally about the validity of quantum mechanics. And if they're not, they should be. No one that's in a cult thinks they're in a cult. What's the difference between a large cult and a small cult? The difference is that the big cult is more effective. If everyone, and I mean everyone around you, is in the same cult, then how can you determine that you and everyone around you is in a state of delusion? In order to determine whether you are in a state of delusion, you must accept that it's possible that you are in a state of delusion. Accept that it's possible that everyone around you is in the same delusion. Objectively look for evidence that offers proof of delusion. Like this, for instance. The average human is forced to go to school at the age of 5. In school, if you don't learn what they are teaching you, you fail and get kicked out of the group. If you don't understand math and question math's first principles, you will be told to shut the fuck up and learn math. And if you don't learn math, you'll get kicked out of the group. Then after 15,000 hours of programming, you are awarded a diploma that tells the rest of the group that you have been adequately trained to participate in society, which the group constructs and operates. The reward for participating in the programming is social acceptance and a well-paying job. The cost of not conforming to the group is ridicule and poor-paying jobs. And those who continue in the group to the bitter end spend an additional 18,000 hours of programming, which is rewarded with high social status and authority. You have been subject to a cult. Everyone has. And those at the top levels of the cult are the most brainwashed. They are so certain of the quantum mechanical outfit that they see, and yet the questions, problems, and paradoxes remain until I just fix them. I see the message so clearly that I have come to the conclusion that whoever says they can't see the message must be in this state of delusion. I am the child in the Emperor's New Clothes story. I represent the state of innocence free from the programming that sees the reality and the process through which the illusion itself is projected. This presentation is my attempt to break you free of the programming so that you may also see the reality. Now listen, I understand how difficult this is to accept, but the only way to truth is through your own innate ability to reason. Accept no authority. You are the authority here. You have the ability to understand the truth. Dobson's razor says that whatever makes the most sense is most likely the truth. Because this interpretation makes sense, it is the correct interpretation. This is the correct interpretation because it makes sense. Chew on that one for a while. If you don't understand a theory, it's a belief that's been programmed into your consciousness. If you understand a theory, it's truth. All I ask is that if this interpretation makes sense to you, you figure it's not impossible for it to be true, and you figure that's enough to necessitate open dialogue about it, then please vote for it. And if you come to see that this is indeed the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics, then you must do everything in your power to get this message out. You need to declare that the empire has no close. We can't keep going on in this state. Look at where it's taken us. Look at our trajectory. Is anything coming down the pipe through conventional academia, anything going to change this trajectory? No, this is what's required. Refuse to accept that reality is dualistic. Allow for the possibility that the world quantum mechanics is describing exists only in the minds of the quantum theorists and on the screens of the technology they construct. This is the greatest revelation in human history. Did you expect that the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics wouldn't shake things up? Inserting the imaginary unit into the fMOR reveals its true nature. I is duality and ambiguity symbolized. I is an abomination. Let's keep in mind that physics has brought about all technology. Specifically, quantum physics has brought about the internet and cell phone. In turn, technology has humanity helplessly addicted to the screen, has humanity completely dependent upon the technology for its survival and the operation of society. The technology is killing all life on the planet. One cannot be more wrong than killing all life on a planet. The importance of what has just been revealed to you is best conveyed through religious metaphor. I is the great deceiver Satan. I is Maya, the force that casts the illusion that powers the cycle of samsara, suffering. This message is the second coming of God into the divine game. This time, God is interacting with humanity in the form of the Holy Ghost, the Yin. This time, God speaks to us in the form of message. This message. This message is Kali, the destroyer of illusion. And Kali destroys illusion violently, and apparently with divine irony. Maybe that's why the tongue. There won't be many of us declaring the empire naked, but we will be on the side of truth, and we'll be playing this divine game at the highest level, which is very fucking cool. Vote, share, talk about this. Thank you.